So we have a guest from Coventry, upstate again. Surprising people come from all around the country.
Alyssa, do you know whether your family in Guyana can get in on this?
Yep, yeah. I think a few people are already in the room.
Oh, great. Well, hello to them. It's nice to be able to see people coming in. There's a hostel, by the way, where we usually have had our programs, our meeting programs, is now open to guests. And I met some students coming in the other day. So hopefully we can reconvene as well as do Zoom there in the near future. Well, in the future.
Okay. Vita, do you want to start while people are coming in?
Right. Sure. Thank you so much, Michael. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Vita Wallace, and I am a member of the planning committee of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group, whose motto is, "We are the inheritors, the interpreters, and the creators of our history." For the past 20 years, this small volunteer group has gathered neighbors together for nearly monthly walks and talks. Our next event will feature author Andrew Alpern on posh portals of the Upper West Side, Monday, June 21st on Zoom. So that should be a lot of fun. Jim Mackin is going to begin giving his celebrated walking tours again this summer. So be sure to visit our website, upperwestsidehistory.org, for details. If you're not already on our mailing list, you can sign up on our website by clicking on the Contact Us button. While you're there, also check out the recent blog pieces by Pam Tice on the history of farming in our neighborhood during the colonial period and pulling back the rug on the history of slavery in the area. Also, be sure to click on resources. We keep adding new ones. In fact, they're getting too numerous to list now, but lots of very useful, good stuff there. If you click on past events, you will find many that you can watch at your leisure, including our last program, which was about the rich history of Latin music in the dance clubs, apartments, parks, and streets of our neighborhood. Once again, that's all at upperwestsidehistory.org. Today, we are delighted to welcome our featured speaker, Alyssa Cherry, for two reasons. The first is a personal connection. Alyssa's grandmother, Hedda Fields, was a key member of our planning committee for many years. You may remember her sitting at the door at our talks, encouraging everyone to sign in. It is thanks to her that we have such a fine mailing list, and most likely thanks to her that you are here today. The other reason we are delighted to welcome Ms. Cherry is the subject she is bringing to our attention, soundscapes. Here we have something similar to landscapes, but heard rather than seen. Something related to music, but broader in scope. The Canadian composer and writer R. Murray Schafer, in his 1977 book, The Tuning of the World, says, quote, "The home territory of soundscape studies is the middle ground between science, society, and the arts." What could be more intriguing? Our speakers usually focus on a period of history further back, and then we invite all of you to consider how that past has shaped our present and how you would like to see the future unfold. But to quote Schafer on Soundscapes again, we are disadvantaged in the pursuit of a historical perspective. Sounds may alter or disappear with scarcely a comment from even the most sensitive of historians. Ms. Cherry is going to speak about how to listen to a soundscape, how soundscapes change from neighborhood to neighborhood in Manhattan, how they change over the course of the seasons each year, and how to listen for them changing from year to year. We would like to invite you to look further back, to listen further back, to note your own sound memories, as well as ear witness accounts, and to use your imagination, drawing on the information and skills Ms. Cherry provides, to consider not only the soundscapes of the past, but also how they may change in the future. As Schafer asks, is the soundscape of the world an indeterminate composition over which we have no control? Or are we, its composers and performers, responsible for giving it form and beauty? Now, a little more about artist and investigator Alyssa Cherry, currently a PhD candidate in social justice education at the University of Toronto and president of the Canadian Union of Public Employees Local 3907. Formerly Director of Education for Real Work, Teen Film Works, Ms. Cherry obtained her master's in media studies at the New School. While Ms. Cherry speaks, you are welcome to type questions and comments into the chat. After she's finished, my colleague on the History Group's Planning Committee, Michael Gonzalez, will moderate the conversation, bringing your questions to Ms. Cherry's attention. With thanks to Michael, Wynn Armstrong, and all of my colleagues behind the scenes, and again to all of you for joining us, it is my pleasure to present Alyssa Cherry.
Thank you so much, Vita, for that great intro. It sounds like there's really incredible work that's being done and awesome events happening soon. So I'm very excited about that. All right, so let me just share my screen. Okay, everyone can see that all right?
Looks good.
Okay, I just need to make sure that you guys can hear the audio that's going to come by. So let me just do it again real quick. Sorry, everyone. We practiced this like 10 times and I still can't get it. All right, here we go. Great. All right, awesome. So thank you so much, Vita. That was excellent. So today I figure what we're going to do is really go through what a soundscape is. I'll talk a little bit about my project, Sounds of the Outskirts, and we'll have a few listening activities. I hope you guys are ready. So before, just a few housekeeping notes. Before I do any sort of workshop or teach a class or anything like that, I do like to do a land acknowledgement because I think that's really important for us to get into the habit of doing. So if you bear with me for a moment, we are gathered on the unceded land of the Lenape peoples. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Indigenous community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. I, as a speaker for the Upper West Side History Group, also acknowledge that many homes, businesses, organizations, and institutions in our neighborhood were founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous people, including those whose land this event is taking place, even virtually. This acknowledgement demonstrates mine and hopefully all of our commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Another housekeeping note. So as an employee and a student of the University of Toronto, I did have to get special permission to sort of give this workshop today because there is a censure taking place. So as an academic employee of the University of Toronto, I do stand by the Canadian Academic Union of Teachers' decision to censure the University of Toronto due to their prejudiced hiring practices, specifically that of Dr. Valentina, whose offer was rescinded due to her work on human rights in Palestine. This workshop specifically is not connected to my academic research as an employee of the University of Toronto, which thus allows me to speak with you all today without any consequences. All right, great. So now that that's all out of the way, let's get going. Okay, so before I start talking, I thought it might be nice to see something a little bit. So Raymond Schaefer is somebody that Vita's already quoted, but I thought this would be an interesting first step into Soundscapes.
A soundscape is any collection of sounds, almost like a painting is a collection of visual attractions. I think when you listen carefully to the soundscape, it becomes quite miraculous when you listen carefully and marvel. Well, we hear the train going off into the distance. We can hear some birds, of course. We can hear some traffic noise from Highway 7, quite distant. The most interesting thing, of course, is the birds at this time of the day. We can hear them in all directions. I think if you listen carefully, your life is enhanced. I think it becomes much more interesting. It's the same as looking carefully. If you can use your senses properly, and in art we try to get people to use their senses, to listen carefully, to look carefully at things, that enriches your life.
So I love that idea of listening to enrich your life, right? And that's something we're really going to talk about today. So there was an Atlantic article actually just last year that talked a lot about soundscapes specifically because we were all at home, right? We were listening to things that we probably weren't listening to before. So this idea of a soundscape as an acoustic environment as perceived and analyzed by humans, right? So what we're going to do today is learn how to listen and learn how to analyze those sounds. Okay, so what we're going to do first is a listening exercise. So John Cage, who's sort of one of my heroes, said that Thoreau got up each morning and walked to the woods as though he had never been where he was going to. So that whatever was there came to him like liquid in an empty glass. Many people taking such a walk would have had their heads so full of other ideas that it would have been a long time before they were capable of hearing or seeing. Most people are blinded by themselves. So I'm not going to tell you where the location was, and I'm not going to tell you necessarily how to listen. Please use the chat to put in your first thoughts, your feelings about what you're listening to. So just looking at the chat, some of the things that I'm seeing are a New York City afternoon, music in the streets. A lot of people were saying rain and water, which is interesting. Car traffic, maybe somewhere outside a jazz spot. That's great. That means you guys are all really starting to think about placing yourself in the sound. Now, let's see here. So how would you listen to that if you're actively listening, if you're focused on listening? So listening really only needs one sense, So what I suggest is the next time that we're doing any listening exercises today, to close your eyes. Close your eyes and really sort of focus in on what it is that you're trying to pull out. And by pulling out, I mean isolating. So a fun activity that you can do really any time of the day, anywhere you are, is to close your eyes and try to isolate some sounds, to really pick up on things. It's a great practice for your ears. It's also a great practice for your brain too. So if you're walking down a city street, really trying to focus in on maybe the sound of that dog tag on a dog's collar and dulling out the other noises. The last thing, and this is something we're going to talk a lot about today, is think about what you're hearing and why you're hearing it. So the why is the really important part. Where are you in the city that you're listening to this? Why are these sounds actually happening? Why everything, So let's try and do this activity one more time to give yourself a sense of where we were. This was actually taken on the corner of Central Park West and 100th Street. So I saw your comment, Louise, that you hear this all the time. Me too. So when you're listening, what do you hear? Try to really isolate those sounds. So again, use the chat to type out all of the individual sounds that you're hearing. Repeat's totally welcome. So if you're hearing 12 bikes, feel free to write bike 12 times. Let's see what you all said. You've got jazz, birds, probably my dog in the background, a car, traffic, lots of traffic, vehicles, clinking. It's a really interesting. So some of the things that you guys were hearing, so there was like a buzzing sound, and that buzzing sound was actually a moped going up Central Park West really, really fast. The clicking and the banging that you were hearing was somebody opening and closing a door of a taxi cab. So it's just about really learning how to listen to these sounds and identify them. Great, that was fun. All right. So what I think is really interesting is that when we saw Raymond Schaefer's video, he was on a farm, right? And that's a great place to sort of practice your soundscaping because there are very few layers. And when I talk about layers, I mean various different kinds of sound. So again, John Cage says, our business in living is to become fluent with the life we are living, and art can help this. So this was sort of my entryway into soundscapes, was that my grandmother actually, I remember growing up and she would make me walk such long distances. At least to me, it felt like a really long distance from her apartment down to 59th Street and back. And, you know, I had little legs, she had little legs. It took us a while, but she was adamant that the best way to learn about a city was to walk through the city. So that's sort of how I got into urban soundscapes, a combination of my grandmother telling me I had to walk everywhere, and my love for sound and music. So this project actually came from an urban soundscapes course that I took at the New School, where we were asked to go and listen and really identify what our community sounded like. And I've always identified as a Manhattanite. It's where I call home. So I wanted to really sort of explore what my home sounded like. So then we had Sounds of the Outskirts. So Sounds of the Outskirts was a project that I did over the course of 4 years. What I was doing was I would look at the migration of people on Manhattan outskirts. So that would be specifically on all of the paths that were along the water. And I did this over 4 seasons because I also wanted to see what kinds of shifts in sound there would be based off of the weather. You know, when it's snowing, what does it sound like? When it's quiet, what does it sound like? When it's a summer day and everyone's outside, what does it sound like? Who are the people that are outside? But as you get deeper into it, you can also start listening to how has the economy shifted? And by that, I mean, there's a ton of construction somewhere. That means that there's money funneling from the city into this one neighborhood. Why? How? The immigration rate or change of language or culture in a neighborhood. You can tell that by the languages that are being spoken and just general culture. So I walked along the perimeter once a year, and a lot of the time it was a silent walk. I did invite friends and other people to come and join me, and I did street interviews. I met a lot of really amazing people on this walk, but anytime I wasn't with somebody, I was silent. And it's a real meditative thing to sort of listen so closely to your home silently and not be able to really talk to anyone about it, you know? So the path itself, as you can see, I used an old school map just to sort of keep me on track. There were 4 walks per year. Each walk was a total of 32 miles. And I started from the 209th Street station up at the top of Manhattan. I would go down to 96th Street, which would be 1 walk. Then from 96th Street on the west side down to Battery City, which would be another day. And then from Battery City up to 86th Street on the east side. And then from 86th Street on the east side back up to the 209th Street station. And I did that specifically because 32 miles is a lot. And yes, it can be done in a day. A lot of people have done it in a day. But for this particular project, I really wanted to take my time, you know? Part of this is about really being able to focus and listen and practice that sort of meditative state of listening. And I couldn't do that if I was rushing to do it in a day. The equipment that I used, I just had an H4n recorder, which is just a standard recorder, but I had headphones plugged into it. The reason that I did that was because when you're listening to soundscapes on headphones, rather than just listening in the city, everything is amplified, you know? So if you're walking silently and you're listening to something amplified, it feels like you're not necessarily alone. You can hear things that are happening around you that maybe you don't see. So that was a fun but intense portion of it. I did carry a notebook. I carried a notebook with me because there are certain things that you want to document about the trip to sort of give your analysis context that you can't get from the actual audio. And I thought it would be fun to sort of look back at these particular walks and give you sort of a glimpse as to the kinds of notes that I was taking. So this was from October of 2015. So this was a fall walk. This was my second walk of the perimeter. And I said at 2:27 p.m. on the 24th of October, finally found the exit to the park. The sounds are starting to collide. The birds are so loud. Oh my gosh, this view of the cloisters is incredible. I am so happy to see people here. They're running, they're walking. How could you not take advantage of how beautiful this place is? Problem, it's mostly white. So I think that last piece that I said, problem, it's mostly white, is a really important piece to add to my analysis, because race is not something that you can document audibly. You know, if race is a social construct, it's not real. It can't actually be documented because you can't hear it, right? And I wanted to make sure that I was documenting that for my analysis. Okay, so as I was walking, things that I was listening for. So I was listening for language. A change in language is really a change in community and a change in culture. And like we were talking about before, you can't document race, but you can document language. And I think that's a really important thing to note, specifically in Manhattan, which has a variety of language, hundreds of languages spoken. Another thing that I really was focusing on specifically was industrial sounds, because again, sort of learning about the shifts in economy, I think it's really important to focus on what construction teaches us about change. Is money coming into a certain neighborhood and not coming into others? Why some spaces? How much money is being spent? So are we talking new filling of potholes, or are we talking brand new high rises, you know? Another thing would be music. What kind of music and from where? So are we listening to maybe Buddhist chants from the temples in Chinatown? Or are we listening to bachata in Washington Heights? What are we listening to and from where? So is it stationary or mobile? Is it coming from a bodega or is it in somebody's car? And being able to really analyze the surroundings based on that. Another thing to think about when you're out doing a sound walk is children. So is the space child friendly? Are you in a school zone? Are you in a playground? Are you in a park? What does that mean? And then the other thing I thought about quite a bit, because again, I was listening on headphones, right? So everything was amplified, is what does class sound like? Who is on the street being heard and who isn't? When you're walking down the street, let's say you're walking to the train, you're on maybe Broadway and 98th Street, and you're walking down to the 2-3 chain. And you're used to hearing the sounds of the buses and the sounds of the subway and the sounds of the people, but you're not used to hearing the homeless person outside of Paris Baguette asking for money. That is something that you would only really hear when you have these headphones on, or you're looking for that because you are so used to dulling that out. I think being able to pick up sounds like that as you're walking is really important, because it teaches you about your neighborhood, who your neighbors actually are, you know? Okay, so I thought it would be great if I talked to you a little about some fun highlights from my walks. The first would be the East River Fishermen. I was walking, I believe it was around 2 bridges on the east side, and I saw a ton of fishermen. And I was so confused because to me, the East River seems so scary, right? But there were so many people who were fishing. and I was talking to this one guy. He looked a little chilly. And as I was talking to him, he told me that he forgot his scarf. And I said, well, why don't you just go home and get your scarf? And he was telling me the story about how he is a fisherman who fishes in the East River and then sells that fish to fish markets in Chinatown. That's his source of income. If he were to have gone home, his wife would know that he's not at work. So he refused to go home and have her yell at him. And he just stayed on the water that whole day. Another fun thing that I noticed was rapid language changes above 125th Street. So as you're coming south from 209th Street down to 96th Street, you are going to hear Hebrew, you're going to hear Yiddish, you're going to hear Russian, you're going to hear Spanish, you're going to hear a variety of dialects of Spanish, English, and I heard patois. And that was all from just on the outskirts, not in the island, just on the outskirts. So that just shows me that Harlem is not one neighborhood, you know? The next thing that I noticed was the quiet on the west side. There was a difference between walking along Riverside Drive and walking along the Hudson River. I did both in 2 different years. Walking along the Hudson River, we talked about the layering of sounds. There are so few layers of sounds, but the layers that are there are very strong. So the cars, obviously, because of the West Side Highway, that was one sort of dulling layer when you're listening. And then you have the sounds of the bikes and the footsteps of people who are running, jogging, and using their bike or their skateboard. And then you have the sound of the water hitting the rocks. And that was it. So when you think of quiet, right, a lot of people think of quiet as silence. As a student of John Cage, I think silence is not a real thing. So to me, this was one of the quietest places in New York because there were so few sounds. And then the last, I think, which was really interesting, was when I went from 86th Street on the east side to 209th Street, back up to the beginning. And this was the last leg. So the last leg, I'm normally exhausted because I've been walking for 3 days. And there is a ton of traffic on the east side, mostly because of the way that the island itself curves in and the Bronx is sort of in that indentation. The other thing that you can hear is there are audible class shifts. So walking along the river on 86th Street, you're going to hear a lot of people, a lot of children, a lot of dogs. You've got Gracie Mansion, tons of people. It feels almost like a tourist attraction. As you make your way further, I would say above 110th Street, or really above 116th Street, is when you can audibly hear things that you didn't hear elsewhere. So examples, I heard on my recordings drug deals going down. I heard sex workers. I heard dumpsters getting dived, you know, people jumping into dumpsters. These are sounds that I didn't hear anywhere else. And what does that say about our city, that there is one isolated space where these are the things that are happening? Okay, so the final outcomes, I'm just going to turn on my lights. I'm realizing the sun is going down. Okay, I'm back. So final outcomes. So for me, the hardest part was actually creating the final outcomes. Part of this was because it needs a lot of money. To make art, you need a lot of money, and that's just the reality of it. You need people to do things, you need equipment, all of that. So the 3 final outcomes that I was actively working towards and then was sort of put a stop at because of finances. First would be a virtual map. As an educator, I really wanted this to be a tactile experience for kids. This would have been, and I found another artist who was willing to work with me, this would have been a video projection, a projection of the Manhattan map that allows you to touch neighborhoods and listen to the soundscapes that I've recorded. The other final outcome would have been an audio piece, which I actually did finish. This is a hour-long soundscape of all 4 years of the walk. So you'll be able to really sort of, it's layered in a way that you'll be able to listen to the changes in the neighborhood based on the season. And then the final project is something that I've been working on with some musicians. And if there are musicians in the audience who are interested in doing it, please hit me up. Would be a project in which musicians are in locations that are sort of riffing off of the soundscape of the space. So they're making music out of the music we're already hearing. So those were the 3 final outcomes that I was hoping and almost got to. So specifically for our neighborhood, 2 more listening activities for us. So the first is, this is an audio that I got just last week, 2 weeks ago, I believe. I was walking down Amsterdam Avenue, and it was one of those summer days where sort of everyone's sitting out and they're drinking and they're having fun and they're walking the streets and things like that. And there was so much movement happening. So let's take a listen. And again, please use the chat to start putting in any of your first reactions, maybe answering the questions that are there for you. What does that sound of movement sound like? Or any particular sounds that really struck out to you. Let's see what you all said. All right, so we have, let's see here, a bus, children, horns, traffic sirens, laughing, silverware, great, steps, a parent and kid conversation. Yeah, that was really fun to sort of eavesdrop on. Blended voices, children. Yeah, exactly. And to me, that's really what summer sounds like in the city. You know, it sounds like movement. It sounds like people outside. It sounds like people really enjoying the city and enjoying each other in the city. Now, this is something that Wynn and I have talked about a lot, this idea of what does winter sound like? And winter itself in New York City, a lot of people think winter is a really quiet time in New York because it is a time when people are inside. It's a time when not a lot of cars are happening. So what I did was during a snowstorm, actually, I had to take my dog on a walk. So I went into the park. And for those of you that are in the neighborhood know that the hill that is right at the entrance of the 100th Street entrance of the park, there is a hill that all of the kids love to go sledding. And I think this was maybe our second or third snowstorm of the week. So let's take a listen And let's hear what that sound of joy sounds like. Great. Oh, I love that thrill. That's what you heard. That's wonderful. Nia, a robust laugh. Yes. The kids screaming, right? A lot of times when you think of a kid screaming, it's maybe screaming in pain or something like that. But screaming sometimes is such a great way to share your excitement. So they were outside in a park in the snow. You could hear my dog sort of sniffing and playing in the snow as well. And that's what joy sounds like. That's what winter in Central Park sounds like. It sounds like joy. So that is it for the program. I would love to answer any questions you may have. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alyssa. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A. I think someone was wondering how you're recording your sounds, and that's if you want to talk a little bit on that.
Sure. So as I said, I used an H4n recorder, which is just like a standard, it looks kind of like a brick with antennas coming out of it almost. It is not discreet, it's not a discreet way to do it, but it's a way to sort of gain a little bit of confidence in yourself that you can walk down the street and hold something that looks a little crazy and no one's gonna no one's gonna care.
See, a lot of people are saying they will be listening more closely to Soundscapes.
That's great. That's fantastic.
Let's see. If anyone wants to talk, I can put you guys off mute so you can mention something if you want to raise your hand. Someone said, have you had any thoughts on how exposure to sound and other loud noises affect physical and mental health? And then we
For
have
sure.
speaker after that.
For sure. I think that's something that we all went through in the last year, right? Especially in this neighborhood, being so close to the hospital, being so close to Central Park, where there were sirens going in and out of the park every day. I think this was something that I definitely noticed quite a bit over the last year. Also, if any of you heard the fireworks, I'm sure all of you heard the fireworks in the neighborhood. That caused a lot of trauma for a lot of the animals in the neighborhood, as well as us. We didn't sleep, things like that. But again, you have to ask yourself that question of why? Why am I hearing this sound? So it was also at the time that George Floyd was murdered. It was at a time where there was civil unrest in the city. A lot of people are linking the fireworks to protest, to that idea of no one should sleep when people are being killed in the streets. And this was something that was happening across the country. So for those of you that were very upset and hurt by the sounds, including my dog, I had to put him on antidepressants, the reasoning behind those sounds is, I think, what's really important to keep track of. And that's only going to help you with your mental health, because Yes, the loud, the high pitch and the high decibel is really going to hurt your eardrums, that's for sure. But also understanding why those things are happening, like the sound we're hearing right now.
Okay, so now I'm going to let Andrea talk for a bit. Let's see. Andrea, you should be able to. There we go.
Not Andrea, it's Salvador, but I wanted to ask you, Alyssa, if you ever tried staying in one place for the day, and then you get morning sounds and midday sounds and afternoon sounds, because I know when we were in the bush, you could tell the time of day without a clock by the sounds you were hearing. Certain birds at certain times of the day, you can, it's different. Morning sounds are different from midday sounds, are different from afternoon sounds. I just wondering if you did any of that.
For sure. So first of all, this question is coming from Guyana. So hello to my parents. No, I did not do that. And I did not do that for no reason. There's no reason that I didn't do it. I think it's something that we should all do, you know. If you're in a space, in any space, you'll be able to hear the difference. I know that, and this is just from my time as a barista, you know, waking up at the crack of dawn in the morning and you're walking down Broadway. It's a very different Broadway than it is at noon, than it is at 5, than it is at 9 p.m. and then at midnight again, you know. And it's not about what it looks like, it's about what it sounds like.
Next question is this something you want to explore in other neighborhoods in New York City, or do you know any other artists doing similar works?
Yes, I really wish I could remember the name of this professor. There was a professor at CUNY who actually wrote a book about this, not specifically the sounds, but what he did, it was about walking. He walked every single block in all 5 boroughs. And he was, you know, in his 40s at the time. He was a professor at CUNY. He was, you know, a balding white guy with white tennis socks walking around Brownsville. And that's something to document itself, you know. I don't know of a lot of other people who are doing things like this. There are articles that come out sometimes. And I think that's really just during times of reflection that people have, like the article I mentioned in the Atlantic for last year, this idea of being stuck in one place. So you're noticing things that you don't necessarily notice all the time.
I think his name was Helmrich. It's in the chat, I think.
Amazing. Yes.
And then if you have something to say, I think you can ask. Possible.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Alyssa, as you know, we try to follow the history here. And I know that the sounds by day, as you point out, by day and night are different in the different neighborhoods, and by seasons, and also by times. And during this COVID period, we've had some very specific sounds that go with the COVID period. There's the sounds at 7 p.m. every night that people bang on their fences and ring bells and yell for the and that will be a unique sound for this period. The augmentation of the sirens on Central Park West is another. We did put together a photographic compendium of visions of what this neighborhood has looked like during the COVID period, but we haven't done the sounds. And do you know of any whether around here or elsewhere, where they have recorded sounds over a period? I'm very aware, having lived in this neighborhood for 50 years, that the sounds have changed, the languages have changed, the ethnic parades down Central Park West, you know, have changed. There are a lot of, when I think about it, you can trace the history through sounds as well. Do you know of any places or projects or people who have done that?
You know, I don't know of people who've done that. And part of the reasoning behind this project and really all the projects I do as an academic, right, is to fill a gap in knowledge. And I think that this is definitely what you're pinpointing, Win, is definitely a gap in knowledge and a gap in history that we don't have. There are things that we can do to document. So like this project, and this was just documentation for myself, right? That I'm happy to share with people.
Not anymore.
Exactly. But really it's about documenting for yourself at this point, because I don't know anyone, I don't know of a museum who's doing this. I don't know.
Okay. Can I invite any of the listeners to email us and let us know if they know any things like this, because it would be fun to follow up. Thank you.
Okay. Email. You can either email the Columbus Amsterdam bid, or if anyone has an email that they want to send it to. Next question would be, what's the most beautiful sound you've heard while doing your project?
Sorry, I'm just waiting for the siren to pass. The most beautiful sound I heard during the project. That's really hard. I mean, there's some beautiful sounds, could be children laughing, you know, that's always a beautiful sound to be able to hear kids laughing. To me, some of the most beautiful sounds were actually the Dominican guys playing dominoes along the West Side Highway. That's always one of my favorite spots, because they're there without fail, and there's always music, and you can always hear them talking to each other. And it always, even when they're arguing and you're listening to them argue, there's a sense of joy and camaraderie and family that's happening. And those are the sounds I like listening to the most.
People are mentioning how there's sound of thunderstorms right now occurring, and how, especially with dogs, they are more keen to hearing things coming before we do.
For sure. I mean, they hear things better than we do.
For me, I have a question for you actually. What is one of the most, like, I guess, what's the sound you didn't expect in the neighborhood that you came across? Like, what's the most surprising sound that you came?
Most surprising sound. Two things. I think one of the most surprising sounds was being on, I think it was like 190th Street, and realizing that it's a Russian neighborhood. Did not know that at all. You know, been living in the city for a long time, had no idea that there was an uptown Russian neighborhood. Another surprising sound was definitely the sex workers on the Upper East Side. It was just, you know, that's always a surprising sound. And yeah, I think those two, definitely.
Someone mentioned another person working on unique soundscapes. R. Murray Schaefer, recognized by UNESCO.
He did that. He was the video that I first showed today.
Got it. Someone was saying how context is very important to the sound. So whether it's gunfire, gunshots, it could depend if you're in rural America or if you're in this urban city, two different meanings of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think context is really, really important. And part of that is part of what we're talking about today is building that context, right? Asking that why. So when you hear gunfire, being able to say, okay, where am I locationally? And does that make sense for where I am? Does it not make sense? Should I be concerned? How close is it? That sort of a thing. So part of listening is asking that why, and that why is that context.
If anyone has any questions, or if you want to speak and say something, feel free to raise your hands, and again, I can unmute you. Okay. Let's see. And I also put up the email on the chat if anyone wants to email any questions to us. Someone asked if we check with NPR for any projects about soundscapes.
Both NPR and the New York Times have both done soundscape projects specifically in New York City. What was different about mine, though, is that it was specifically about the outskirts rather than the inside of the island. The outskirts was an area that I felt was neglected in a lot of conversation about New York City. So again, it was about filling that gap in what's already out there.
Got it.
Maybe since we're here together, we could just quickly put some things in the chat that we remember hearing from when we first came to the neighborhood, whenever that was.
For those of you asking if this is going to be recorded, it will be on our YouTube. I'm going to put the link in here. You can also find it on the Upper West Side History, upperwestsidehistory.org. The website, the link will be posted there tomorrow evening. Interesting.
I mean, I can say something about it. So I remember when I first came back home, because I was up in Toronto doing my classwork for the last few years, and I came back home right before COVID. And where I was living in Toronto was so quiet. And I remember it being so quiet. You could barely hear cars outside. There weren't children playing around anywhere. You'd have to walk for a while to really be able to hear anything other than the 29 bus in Toronto. When I moved back home, I forgot how loud it was in this living room. You know, I forgot how loud New York sirens were. I forgot how loud people were. I forgot that people laughing and hearing those things in the park was a good thing. You know, I got so used to being in a quiet office or in a quiet library or a quiet cafe that when I came home in this particular neighborhood, I realized how loud and lively the space was.
Yeah, that was, I don't know if I liked the idea that New York City had a quiet moments like a few weeks following the first lockdown, but it was a bit eerie being downtown. I started biking around and it was just, there was no cars around. It was like one or two every now and then it would just be maybe four or five people walking like along the streets. It was kind of eerie seeing the city that silent, but a little bit calming because it's I had never been able to go to Soho and hear my own thoughts.
Definitely. I feel like a lot of publications are really focusing on what the city looked like, right? There are lots of pictures of empty streets, lots of pictures of empty parks, of empty office buildings and things like that, but not a lot of people talk about what that sounded like. And what that sounds like is, yes, it was quiet, but it also sounds that quiet was built out of fear, right? And you hear the fear in the silence. And again, it's making that context. It's asking, why is it so quiet? And it adds a level of emotion to the quiet that you weren't necessarily expecting.
Yeah, and I just add one last thing, I guess, is I remember like walking to the Brooklyn Bridge, and for the first time in forever, I don't think I had any problems like walking into someone or anything. It was the first time I could take a picture of an empty Brooklyn Bridge and hear the soundscapes. And actually, the Brooklyn Bridge Park had actually done this little article about all the different birds and sounds that they could hear from all these native wildlife coming back, because there wasn't that much tourism around that area. So it was just like impressive to see nature again kind of revitalizing itself throughout the recovery of the city.
You hit on something really important there, and that's the idea of being able to listen to nature healing itself, right? New York City is not necessarily known for its nature, but I'm sure that there are a lot of birders out there who know that that's a real thing. And it's funny because I was talking to someone, and I remember one day all of the birds were singing at the same time, and to me it sounded like the birds were screaming, right? It sounds like they're screaming and hollering because it's a sound that you're not used to being so prominent. And again, asking yourself why are these sounds so prominent? And it's because there were levels and layers of that soundscape that's being stripped away. And also because you're listening to more birds, because there are less people in the park to scare them away, you know?
Okay, Vita. If you want to mention any last comments, I guess, before we
I
wrap up.
just really want to thank you, Alyssa, for bringing such a fresh point of view and so many new ideas to us today. And I know we're all going to be so excited to go out tomorrow and listen to our day. So thank you so much. And let's keep the conversation going as you get, all of you, thank you for joining us, and feel free to write us with your thoughts about sounds going forward. You can go to our website and click the contact us button and reach us that way if you forget the email address. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Michael.